No, it's not going live yet. It's saying wait a minute and then try again on Facebook. Hey, I think we are live though on YouTube. I think we are. Yeah, I think we're live. We're live. Hey folks, hey folks, hey folks. Um Welcome to Honestly Speaking, Armchair Quarterbacks. As we say, how are you doing? You got myself and Mark, the Coco, Marcus, the Coco King here live. We are the Armchair Quarterbacks. The reason why we're doing this is because my crew, our team, we have depth, and part of what we like to talk about is sports. So Armchair Quarterbacks is a segment we might do a weekly or bi-weekly to just talk about sports and the implications of sports on real life, kind of like some of the things that people talk about when they talk about sports, but then also the things that people don't talk about on broadcast when they talk about sports. So yeah, that's Armchair Quarterbacks. And welcome. Today, this is our first one. Please remember, if you're tuning in on YouTube, to like, share, subscribe. Make sure you subscribe, then like, then share it. And if you are on Facebook, make sure you share this. This is going to be a short one. We're not talking for an hour and a half. We're probably going to talk about a half hour, maybe 45 minutes tops. But today we're going to talk about Colin Kaepernick and some recent things going on in sports. Before we get into that, Marcus, is it anything that you want to talk about as it pertains to sports? I know I got some updates.
We were just speaking off camera. Hey, good afternoon, folks. Glad to be here. Glad for those of you who are joining us. Glad to have you. We were just talking about Henry Ruggs III was recently involved in a DUI, which resulted in death. He is the wide receiver he was the wide receiver for the Las Vegas Raiders.
Mm-hmm.
Former Alabama player. Um, Looked like he had good promise in the NFL. But with barring any unforeseen events, it looks like his career is probably over because in Nevada, death a DUI resulting in death is considered a Class B felony, which carries a 2 to 20 year prison sentence.
Wow.
There's no way around going to prison. Um, that just happened a couple days ago. Um, we just spoke about Aaron Rodgers. What is it? Health and safety protocol.
Right.
Some people think that's a conspiracy theory of the NFL, but who knows?
Yeah, I
Um,
think that they want the Cowboys to win. That's my theory, and I'm not just saying this as an Eagles fan. I'm saying this like Jerry pays a lot of money, folks. Jerry pays a lot of money. So
that
yeah.
he does.
So we're talking about recent things. As a Philly fan, I think it's very interesting when we talk about basketball. So we could just run down some recent things in sports. It seems like we don't know what's going on with Ben Simmons in the city and Philly. Marcus knows. I've been saying for years that uh, Ben needs a sports therapist. I said it beforehand. My particular theory is that he is going to now play the mental health card, if you will. And the reason why I say play the mental health card, I'm also a therapist. I think that there are legitimate things going on with him emotionally, psychologically, and things like that, but not necessarily in the way that he's going to present it. I think he's going to probably try to use it as an excuse to get out of being held accountable for the way he's responding to his actual mental health. So yeah, that's what I think is going on with Ben Simmons. As it pertains to the NFL, we already said our prayers are that Aaron Rodgers and his family and everybody is safe. Anything else? I don't know what's going on with Coco King's connection right now. He'll pop back on, but yeah, I think it's a setup for him to for for the Cowboys to try to at least get further in the playoffs than what they have been. But as an Eagles fan, I'm telling you, I do not want the Cowboys to win anything. I don't want the Cowboys to win a thing.
I'm back.
So so yeah, that's it. Also, and women's soccer, shout out to Carly Lloyd, Jersey native, big Philadelphia Eagles and Sixers fan. She just retired after 9 years on a women's U.S. soccer team and in the professional sport of women's soccer. And speaking of women and loving Philly, shout out to Kalila Copper, who was on the WNBA's national championship team. She actually rang the bell at the Sixers game recently, and her game is really good and solid. All right, with that having been said, let's dive into today's topic. So today we are talking about Colin Kaepernick's recent special on Netflix, right? So we're not going to do any spoilers for those who have not seen it. Well, we're going to try not to do spoilers. You can't really talk about this if you haven't done spoilers, right? But we are going to talk about what the actual overall uh series is about, as well as what we think about what the series is about. So a brief synopsis: this is Colin Kaepernick's like view on the impressionable years of his life as it pertains to sports. He does a lot of talking. Marcus, is there any talking and correlating sports to life and the current power structure that we have in this country? And is there anything that you feel like stuck out, or you think that I missed about the overall like synopsis of it?
No, I don't think you missed anything. I think the one thing that like smacked me dead in the face watching the first episode was the correlation that we've seen over the years to modern day sports and the slave trade.
Mm-hmm.
He came out swinging for the fences with that one and didn't hold back. I was like, whoa, we in for a treat here. And it's crazy because a lot of people who are short sighted, I guess, they'll be like, well, these athletes choose this life and they make millions and it's not the same. And they're right, it's not the same, but there was millions made off of the transatlantic slave trade.
Mm-hmm.
They gave the slaves what they thought were living wages and slop and whatever else at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And the biggest difference is like the slaves were oppressed. The NFL players or any professional athlete isn't oppressed physically like the manner and slaves were. So that's where it differs. And of course, the wages that are paid, and but you still have to meet certain measurables. You're still being indoctrinated into a way of thinking and a way of life if you so choose to pursue that. So there are parallels. There are, big differences. I don't want anybody to think that I'm saying it's the same exact thing. Don't come from my neck talking about some this dude is crazy. Like, no, I understand the differences, but I just thought it was very interesting how he started off and he made the correlation that, a lot of people in the last 10 or so years has been bringing up over and over again because there are similarities.
Right, right. I definitely agree that there are similarities, but there are also huge differences, like as far as them not being able to have ownership over their bodies. I know we see a lot going on with that nowadays in society, period. Just how much leeway does one's employers have over your bodies? And I think if your overall profession depends on your physique, it does require a certain amount of, I want to say, like testing your physique and your skills, which is very, reminiscent of when people were attempting to buy slaves on the auction block during that time when they would bid on certain slaves and look at them as livestock. So I do think that he has a point when he says that, but I think it's a false comparison. I understand it. I think it's a false comparison. However, it does touch on a number of things going on in society. Like when I looked at it, when he started talking about slavery, I was like, oh yeah, he don't ever intend to ever come back to the NFL whatsoever at
Right.
all. Like this was like, oh okay, yeah, he's out. It was like it reminded me a little bit of like how in like Dave Chappelle's last comedy special, it was like, oh yeah, he going out with a bang. He turning over the tables and the chairs on his way out. But a lot of the stuff he talked about was actually good stuff. He spoke a lot about micro expressions. He talked about the origins of micro expressions and in life how we've been made to think that everything, including sports, has to do with race, like the subtleties. Like we see this when they talk about the IQ of quarterbacks versus the physicality of other quarterbacks. So typically, and this is known, like a lot of people talked about this, even Stephen A. Smith, who I disagree with a lot, um, actually talked about this before, about how often white quarterbacks are seen as having higher IQ, sports IQ, and black quarterbacks are seen as just being better physical specimens, almost brutes even. What do you think about that?
Um, yeah, I always like laugh at that when they say, the mental aspect is too much for quarterbacks outside the white race, and it was a great correlation that Kaepernick made in the series. Like the prototype is when we create prototypes, we tend to create prototypes that favor what we think we should be,
Mm,
that kind of speak to our deficiencies. So, you know, the NFL was started, what, 75 or 100 years ago, something like that, by, white men. And so
mm,
there was a time when black players weren't allowed to play in the NFL. So when they did start integrating, the last true position to this date to be fully integrated is the most important position, the quarterback. And it's not for lack of talent or lack of mental acumen. It's still the stereotype that the prototype is Peyton Manning or somewhere there in that realm. You look at the quarterbacks that get drafted, they're all above 6'2", 6'3", and the white guys anyway. And even when they draft a black quarterback, whether he scrambled or not in college, he's billed as athletic and a threat to run. Where there are some pretty good running white quarterbacks, one of the greatest of all time, Aaron Rodgers, was pretty good at scrambling early in his career
mm-hmm.
and did so often to pick up yards, but he was never labeled as a scrambling quarterback.
Right,
So that's how I feel about that. I
right.
feel like it's just crazy.
Yeah, and because it deals a lot with subliminals. And speaking of subliminals, what I liked was that he highlighted how impressionable young athletes are, or young people are, when it comes to athletes. And he started talking about Allen Iverson, and how Allen Iverson was given flack for him just being him, unapologetically black and urban. Because one thing we talk about on Honestly Speaking is just nuance. Okay, not all black people are a monolith. You have urban folks who have a lot in common, whether you black, white, Latino, or whatever. You have suburban folks who have a lot in common, whether you're black, white, Latino, Asian, or whatever. So there's a culture, there's subculture, and then there's intersections, right? So he talked a lot about how um just a lot about how Allen Iverson had a huge impact on the game, and the price that Allen Iverson paid for choosing to be himself. What do you think about that?
Yeah, I think that was another thing in the beginning that piqued my attention and made me say I want to, continue this series because if anybody knows me, I'm the biggest Allen Iverson fan there is. Like, he's my favorite player of all time. Michael Jordan is the GOAT, the greatest of all time, but Allen Iverson is my favorite player, having watched him grow from his freshman year at Georgetown. Um, I didn't understand at the time what the urban culture was while I was living through
Mm,
the shift that Allen Iverson was creating, because all I had been exposed to was the urban culture. I grew up in the hood. I never lived outside of the hood. So to me, that was just it was just us on TV, and it was crazy. I didn't realize how much of an impact it had until there was that enforced dress code in the NBA, and it was like, no, you have to show up for games looking like this and looking like that because you look like a thug. And it was crazy the
Mm,
comparison or the word origin, which I don't know if it's true that Kaepernick used in the series to say where what thug originally meant and how it got transformed into this negative stereotype of melanated people more than anything. Um, so yeah, watching, living, and growing up during the cultural shift was a wild time because I didn't fully appreciate what was going on. But now when I look back, I'm like, Allen Iverson really changed the face of sports and perception, and he paid a heavy price, but I think he'll tell you it was worth it. He did it on his
mm-hmm.
own terms, and he wouldn't change nothing about nothing. He feels as though he needed to be what he needed to be for those who came after him, and for him not to lose the integrity in himself.
Mm. Yeah. So with me, um being from Philly, being a few years older than you, just a few, and but being just different growing up. You know what I mean? I am from the quote unquote hood too. But my mom kind of raised us different. We weren't allowed to drink Kool-Aid. We weren't allowed to watch Good Times. Um, we it was certain things that she should just didn't want us to do. Like we grew up listening to like the Grateful Dead and the Cats in the Cradle and the Silver Spoon. So we knew, urban culture, you know what I mean? But we also knew other things that were outside of that. As a student, I was an artist in high school, and so one of the things we often did was we listened to jazz or classical music while creating content. And I think that those things don't necessarily make you better because it just makes you more well-rounded and have a different view. And I remember watching Allen Iverson um come into the actual league. And the thing that kind of grabbed me was, one, the amount of attack and just visceral venom that was being thrown his way. And then two, how people saw him and didn't necessarily help him. And then three, how he kind of got in his own way. And he talks about that too. Like, if you listen to Allen Iverson, yes, it was worth it as far as him being his authentic self, but there were a lot of things that weren't worth it. And I think that a lot of times the problem is because we're often forced into these false dichotomies, right? Where you have people that's just like, either I'm going to be unapologetically, authentically black, but you not being right. And you calling not being right being black. That ain't, that's just you not being right. That's just you being rebellious. So I think that was part of it. But I think on a positive note, Allen Iverson was willing to pay the price to be himself. And as a result, his points often got mislabeled, much like with Colin Kaepernick. Like the whole you want to talk about practice thing. Now, yeah, Allen Iverson was a rebel. He hated practice. He always was arguing with Larry Brown and all. Like we're from Philly, so we know. Yeah, that was the case. Yeah, he was blowing money at strip clubs. Matt Barnes talks about that often, or talked about that more than a couple of times, and things like that. Yeah, he had issues with his family and with women and things like that. And those are horrible things, but that wasn't the result of his braids or his chains. Like, that didn't have anything to do with that. So I think that's important for us to note too. And his words were often misconstrued, much like with Kaepernick, much like with Colin Kaepernick. Colin Kaepernick says one thing, people fill in the blanks. So I think that that's something that was, to me, really stuck out, because it showed the impact that sports players do actually have on young people and people in society overall. Um, Anything else on the whole Iverson tip that I missed?
No, I think we got it.
All right. So as far as like Um, overall lessons learned from this. What would you say? Overall lessons learned.
Um, I like what he said at the end. Failure is not What I wrote it down because that John was a nice quote that he said. Uh, Rejection is not failure; it's a calibrator. It can help you learn who you are and what you want. Trust your power. I think that was a very powerful message for anybody, any facet of life, whether it's sports, profession, friendships, you know, intimate relationships, anything. Like I think that was my overall takeaway from it is he didn't understand, but he didn't have he said it a couple times. He didn't have the capacity or the words to fight back in certain instances,
Mm,
but he just knew what he wanted and what he felt like he, deserved. He put the work in to make it happen. That's my overall takeaway from the series. On a positive note, on a negative note, it was people are just evil for no reason. Like the way that he portrayed himself being treated at these hotels and these events as being like the
mhm,
only black kid on the team, and you know, we know from experience, like
mhm,
it's not far fetched that stuff really happened.
mhm,
The part that was kind of hurtful was it seemed like his parents were oblivious to his struggle,
mhm.
and even times they put pressure on him to not be who he wanted to be, and they thought they were helping, but really they were creating scars and trauma.
Right. Right. I think that the thing that is um for me, like the lessons was one, like you have influence, like what you said, to understand that your life will have impact, and that inside of all of us are certain levels of resiliency. I think that sports specifically, none like no other in our society aside from like actual combat, is like the test of our resiliency. So I think that he was showing the correlation. Yes, there are negative aspects that come from sports, like the overly competitive nature and things like that, but it shows the resiliency of individuals. I think he highlighted a lot of things that may have been construed as negative with his parents, because his parents, though they loved him, and for those of you don't know, Colin Kaepernick was adopted by two white parents, and he himself is black. He's mixed, um, and it showed how, though they loved him, they still had blind spots themselves, and how as a kid he couldn't necessarily put into words what he felt. He just knew that it was wrong how he was being treated, and even by those whom he loved. And so, what I got from this was one, my fear is that people are going to see this as Colin's uh, bitter swan song to the public. Like he's somehow going to be like this angry dude who's just mad that the benevolent white people didn't coddle to his wokeness, and or the fact that he's just trying to be extra woke. Um, and on the flip side, from a therapeutic perspective, I'm thinking it didn't it just didn't play fair to not show the whole side of his parents, in a sense. Like, yeah, his parents, like, if that's how they were, that's how they were. But I think about how when Donald Trump said, "Get that SOB out of here," and how his mom then tweeted, "I'm the proudest bee on the planet." You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like that, to me, is like she's taken up for her son. Like she may not know much, and I think he hinted towards that, and how they fought for him, or how she went to try to get him to go to a black hairstylist and things like that. There was a point where that happened. So I think that those are the lessons that I get from it. that there is a cost for authenticity. There is a cost for being yourself, and it is really hard to grow when you're in a fishbowl. It's really hard. I think he's really still discovering who he is. And another thing, some people might say this is him just trying to reclaim his blackness since he was deprived of a lot of that at a young age. All of those things could be true, but so could the truth could also be that Colin Kaepernick very well could just be saying that this is his life from his perspective, and that multiple things can be true.
Agreed.
So, on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you give it?
Um, I would say a 7 because of the things that you said that they missed as far as the other side of his parents. Like they just were. It's like they were there. They were more so props. And I understand. I guess they didn't want them to be the stars or the features. So they were more like props in the show to me. I think it would have been nice to dive more into the actual nuance with what they were dealing with raising this black kid and trying to act like everything's normal. Um, I do want to give props for them casting Ron Swanson from Parks and Recreation as the
Straight up.
dad, though. Like,
Straight up.
but
Straight
yeah,
up.
I give it a 7 out of 10 because I thought it was well put together. But I think it's well 6.5. I give it a 6.5 because I think that would have been very big to the parts that were missing.
Yeah, I too will give it a 6.5, um because I love the message. I love even most of the casting. I didn't necessarily like the lack of athleticism from the actor who played Colin. You can tell he just didn't play sports. Like, it wasn't the fact that he was skinny or small. He just, like, when he was playing basketball, bro, I was like, man, this it was killing me. Also, the narration of Colin Kaepernick was not great. Um, I Somebody should have been working with him, and maybe they were, but it just didn't hit home for me. Um, I think it's important that you tell your story, but I don't think you necessarily have to be the one to tell your story. You
Right.
can, get other people who know how to hit it across at home a bit better. I think the cast was diverse. I would be interested to know if that was really the racial makeup of his friends. Um, and I think that they touched on a number of things that, like, one of the things I think they talked about was like the fetishizing of black athletes, particularly by like white women, even at a young age. You know what I mean? And then it's not all white women, of course, but it is like the fetishizing and the fetishizing of white women to particularly black male athletes. You know what I mean? Like, they touched on that a bit, which I thought was good. Um, and so I would say, yeah, 6.5. Also 6.5. I'm not blown away. I think that some of the messages were jarring, and then it kind of got lost in the sauce, and it was a bit anticlimactic at the end. But it was nice for what he produced. It was nice. It got us to talk about this on our first show, so
Right.
that's definitely good. Um, so yeah. Anything else you want to say before we close out? Because we're trying to keep it short.
No, I think we covered it all. I like this, like what we expressed. We got to the point.
Right. And real quick about the Eagles, for the haters out there who are just like, don't be excited that the Eagles beat the Detroit Lions, who are who were 0-7 at the time. I would say this: yes, they were horrible, but no other team all season has beat them the way we beat them. And part of the reason why many Eagles fans are not celebrating in the way that we have been is because, well, we should have been doing this from the beginning. We choose to run the ball now when Miles Sanders not in. We choose to run the ball anyway. So I'll take a win, but yeah. Anything else you want to say about the Eagles real quick?
Go Birds.
That's right. All right. With that having been said, thanks for tuning in. Like I said, we're going to try to keep it short. As we always say, love God, love your neighbor, and take care of yourself. Tune in next week. We'll probably be talking about things that are not related to Colin Kaepernick and other things that are definitely related to sports. Peace.
Peace.